Hello and welcome back or welcome to the channel. I'm Loudguns, and in this series I'm running through every ship and vehicle that's currently available to buy in the game. Today we're going for a 2-for-1 deal combining the ground vehicle focused Tumbril land systems with the ship manufacturer Crusader Industries. Crusader make a number of ships that specialise in transporting ground vehicles, so the pairing does kind of make sense, I promise. Apologies for a bit of delay getting this one out. I had a sick doggo who took priority, but he is well and truly on the mend now. So if this sounds good to you, grab a cup of tea while I roll the intro, then let's get into it. Even if you haven't flown a Crusader ship, the name should be familiar to you, given that they're one of the 4 mega corporations who own Stanton's planets. Their eponymous home is the system's gas giant, which they favoured when the UEE auctioned off the planets due to its existing infrastructure for ship construction. Stanton 2 used to previously be the naval shipyard. Crusader used the floating platforms of Horizon to construct the large ships that they're most famous for. While it hasn't been introduced to the game yet, in lore one of their most popular offerings is the bulk passenger transport, the Genesis Starliner. Crusader as a company are considered to be one of the most altruistic in the SC universe, making their home at Horizon a borderline paradise for their employees and donating large amounts of company profits to charitable causes. Tumbril Land Systems was founded in 2536 with a focus on developing rugged exploration vehicles to aid in planetary exploration. However, with the outbreak of the First Tavaran War in the 2540s, the company rapidly shifted to developing vehicles for the human military. The company ran into financial troubles in the 2860s, but it's back now with new investors, resurrecting a lot of its classic models and updating them for the 2900s. In Star Citizen, ships will generally be exclusive to folks who've pledged for them for 3 to 6 months before going into the ship shops where you can buy them for in-game currency, aUEC. Keep in mind that this means you don't need anything other than a $45 game pack to enjoy the game. If you're keen to try it out, this is the only place that I'd really recommend you to start. Just be sure to use a referral code when you create an account for a bit of extra starter cash. Mine's the one up on screen, but if you've got any friends who play already, please just ask them for theirs. There are 3 major ship shops in the Stanton system. New Deal on Hurston can be found in the main TISA spaceport building at Lorville. Astro Armada is located within the Plaza District of Area 18 on ArcCorp, and the Crusader Industries showroom can be found at Horizon's Cloudview Centre on Crusader itself. Also, don't be afraid to shout out in general chat, or better yet hop into a community Discord like ours, you'll find a link in the video description, because the SC community is on the whole very friendly and welcoming, and people with a certain ship will be more than happy to lend you one to test fly. You'll find all of the Tumbril vehicles featured in this video at the New Deal shop, while the Crusader ships are all on sale from the Crusader Industries showroom at Horizon, although some of these are also on sale at New Deal or Astro Armada. Since I generally try and go in a rough price order, we'll be kicking things off with the Tumbril vehicles, since unsurprisingly ground vehicles are usually a fair bit cheaper than most ships. Up first is Tumbril's most populous offering, the Cyclone series, of which there are 6 variants covering a range of different tasks. The base Cyclone will set you back just over 110,000 aUEC, and it represents the chassis on which all other Cyclones are based. It doesn't have any weapons, but it will provide decent ground transport for you and one passenger. If you've got more friends, you can always just try to get them to hang on in the flatbed at the back. This flatbed is more useful though for carrying a box for looting, particularly since one of the most common use cases for ground vehicles in the current game is accessing locations which are covered by AA defences. Things like hostile bunkers and distribution centres. All Cyclones also have a degree of internal storage that can be accessed via the action wheel when you're entering the buggy. Up next is the Cyclone RC racing variant for 130k. Unfortunately, this one is a bit anticlimactic, since its key advantage for racing is that it essentially has NOS, and it can boost for short periods, but this isn't working and hasn't been for some time now. So its key racing advantage is actually that it's red, and all Space Orcs know that red is the fastest colour. The Cyclone RN, also at 130k, is the scouting variant. It swaps out the pickup bed on the base for a scanner which in the future will allow it to make detailed scans of terrain and place beacons. But again, it's worth noting that these features are still pending at this point, so it's mostly down to rule of cool and how you like your Cyclone to look. And finally, for the 130k mark, we've got the first of 3 combat variants, the Cyclone TR. The rear here mounts a manned turret with a size 1 weapon, and this comes stock as a yellow jacket ballistic Gatling gun, perfect for anti-personnel work, but it's worth noting that you can switch this weapon out if you prefer for something else, but you'll need to keep it ballistic since the vehicle lacks the capacitor to run energy weapons. My personal favourite, the Cyclone MT, comes in at 150k. This is, in my opinion, the strongest of the combat cyclones, with a mixed loadout of a size 1 ballistic cannon and a total of 4 size 2 missiles for AA work. I'm also a fan of the way the missiles offer the turret gunner a degree of protection from small arms fire to the left and right, making you feel just a little less exposed when you're up there. And finally for the Cyclones, at 160k we have the Cyclone AA, the anti-aircraft model. This version packs 2 size 2 missiles which can be fired by the driver, along with an EMP device. Most likely this is destined to be some form of e-warfare, scrambling incoming air-to-ground missiles in the future. Right now, I'm not the biggest fan of the AA, since to my mind it's more money for less in the package, and for a combat version I would lean more towards the MT to get bang for my buck. With the introduction of the Tumbril Storm series recently, there are now a total of 3 tanks in the game, but as of this patch 323.1a, the Storms haven't made it into the in-game ship shops just yet, so I'll be covering them in a future video. However, for just under 1 million credits, you can get your hands on a Tumbril Nova tank. The Nova can be operated solo, in that the driver can also control the main size 5 ballistic cannon, but to operate at peak you'll want a crew of 3, driver, main gunner and a turret operator / spotter. As with many ground vehicles, there's no real gameplay reason to buy a Nova tank, but they are incredibly fun to use just when you can get some friends and augmates together for a PvP battle. And if you want to take things to the next level, then you can always load 3 up on top of an 890 jump and play 890 battleships. So with that, we're moving on from Tumbril and getting into Crusader territory, which now kicks off with the Crusader Spirit series. Technically there are 3 variants in this lineup, but the Executive Transport E1 variant has yet to be introduced to the game. Still in the meantime, we can kick things off with the C1 Spirit at 3.1 million aUEC. This ship is Crusader's competitor with the Misk Freelancer and Drake Cutlass Black, a multi-role medium ship that can definitely throw its hat into the best daily driver competition. In terms of speed and handling, the C1 sits in the middle of the Cutty and the Freelancer, slower than the former, faster than the latter. And it's probably the one with the least amount of punch. The pilot controls 4 size 3s, which is similar to the other 2 ships, but it lacks the gun turret for a second crew member, so overall DPS suffers a bit. However, the co-pilot can control a very well positioned rear-mounted tractor beam turret that can be useful for dragging cargo on and off the ship. With the new cargo haulage missions coming in 3.24, it will be really interesting to see how much of an advantage having something like this is. The ship is also somewhat weaker in terms of components. With 1 size 2 shield, power plant and cooler, there's not really any contingency baked in, and it certainly lacks the defensive properties of say the Freelancer with its 3 size 2 shields. Like the others though, there is a size 2 QT drive to make jumps across the system nice and quick. In terms of cargo capacity, the C1 is arguably the best of the 3. It can take 64 SCU, more than the Cutty's 48, but 2 off the Freelancer's 66. However, since this is the newest ship from the 3, it has very much been designed with the new cargo boxes in mind, and despite its sleek frame, it can carry 2 of the largest 32 SCU containers, whereas these won't fit into either the Drake or the Misk offerings. And in combination with a relatively large fuel capacity for both quantum and hydrogen, I think these factors really shape the C1 Spirit up as a great ship for entry-level cargo haulers. And it's definitely going to be one to keep an eye on and consider in 3.24. Not only will we see the introduction of these haulage missions, but we'll also have a fix for one of the Spirit series' biggest drawbacks. Hangars are all getting a bit bigger, and its fat pancake dimensions currently mean it's a very tight squeeze through some hangar doors. At just under 5 million credits, the A1 Spirit takes the same chassis and pretty much identical components, but adapts the cargo bay to a more singular purpose, making things on the ground explode. One key change in terms of basic loadout is the turret, which on this version ditches the tractor beam and gives you a remote gun turret instead with dual size 2s, to hopefully keep pursuers off your tail as you make those bombing runs. The rear compartment houses a total of 10 size 5 Stormburst bombs, and obviously these aren't on the same level as the size 10 Moabs we'll see later with the A1's bigger brother the A2, but these smaller, more plentiful bombs can be deployed more tactically without just obliterating everything in sight. Bombers like the A1 and A2 do have a purpose in-game, around events like Jumptown and missions like Ghost Hollow where you might want to clear out hostile ground forces. They can be incredibly powerful. But it is worth noting that at the 5 million mark, this is a ship that is very niche, and you'd probably get a lot more bang for your buck in terms of use cases out of other options. The actual mechanics of bombing in SC are literally a bit hit and miss, and to be honest it's an aspect of the game where I'm not sure why a multi-crew option wasn't taken. Currently the bombs are pilot controlled, with a targeting reticle on the ground indicating where your bomb will land. But I'd much prefer to see an option where piloting and pulling the trigger are separated, and the actual bombardier can be using a periscope to look directly down beneath the ship to target the ordnance. Rolling the price level back a bit to 4.7 million, we've got the Crusader Ares series of heavy fighters. These two ships are nearly identical, with a common chassis and components in the form of 2 size 2 shields, 2 size 2 power plants, 3 size 2 coolers, and a size 2 QT drive. The only real difference is the bespoke size 7 weapon that they each pack. The Inferno equips a size 7 ballistic Gatling gun, while the Ion has a laser cannon instead. The SP-7E functions a bit differently to the more standard laser cannons like the M series or Omniskis, in that you can charge up a shot for additional DPS by holding down the trigger. Projectile spread means that both of these ships will struggle to some extent against smaller targets, but they really excel in taking on large and capital vessels. Personally, I'm partial, even after the nerfs, to the ballistic Inferno. I think this is rule of cool in full effect since I just love watching that Gatling gun do its thing. The Mercury Star Runner, or MSR as it's more commonly known, represents quite a price jump at 12.3 million credits, and you'll tend to see it pitted against the likes of the Constellation from RSI, the Drake Corsair and the Origin 400i. In a similar way to the Spirits, the MSR loses out in terms of combat capability versus the offerings from other manufacturers. The pilot only controls 2 size 3 weapons, and this can be supplemented with 2 manual turrets offering another 2 size 3s apiece. In terms of components, the ship has 2 size 2 shields, 2 size 2 power plants, 2 size 2 coolers, as well as a size 2 QT drive. Right now, the MSR's main function is as a daily driver and a bit of a cargo runner with its 114 SCU capacity, placing it above the basic Constellation Andromeda, the Corsair and the 400i. With that hold also being capable of carrying a number of ground vehicles. The MSR is billed as something of a smuggler, with hidden tunnels and vents under the main deck of the ship, reminiscent of the Millennium Falcon. Although I've always personally had a bit of a problem with hidden features that everyone knows about, that are standardised across a ship. The whole reason that they worked on the Millennium Falcon was that only Han and Chewie knew they were there. A key downside to the ship is that its prime USP is non-functional. The ship is billed as a data runner, with servers on board that will at some point in the future tie into that gameplay loop. But right now, they have no use, and we don't really know how or what data running will look like in the future. Still, the MSR is a true rule of cool specialist, and internally it offers great habitation and social areas for you and a couple of mates as you go on adventures in the verse. Whether this justifies the price tag, I leave entirely up to you. But speaking of price tags, we now get to the biggest and most expensive ships in the Crusader lineup at the Hercules Starlifter series. Similarly to other ship families, the Hercs share a common chassis and for the most part common components. Each has 2 size 3 shields and coolers, and the C2 and M2 have 1 size 3 power plant while the A2 has 2. They all have a size 3 quantum drive slot. In all variants, the pilot controls 2 size 5 weapon hardpoints, but the turret configurations vary beyond that. The C2, at 18.9 million credits, is the civilian transporter, and essentially the base version of the model. It has limited firepower, with 2 remote turrets beyond the pilot's guns, each packing dual size 4s. but with only one seat for an operator in the form of the co-pilot's chair, it can only utilise one of these at a time. However, in the game as it currently stands, the C2 still reigns supreme in terms of cargo hauling. With 696 SCU of capacity, it offers the second most tonnage and is only beaten out by the Mist Hull C, which can't enter atmosphere and is severely restricted in terms of trade routes. The next real competitor is the Caterpillar, which at 576 SCU falls a fair bit short. As we discussed in the last video on Drake, the C2 is much better shaped to accommodate the new large boxes. There's capacity on board for 2032 SCU crates, since you can stack the grid 4 units high. The big box nature of the ship also lends itself to transporting ground vehicles. You can comfortably fit 2 Nova tanks or Atlas platform vehicles like the Centurion or the Ballista on board. You can also accommodate vast amounts of smaller vehicles like Cyclones or SDVs. There are of course some downsides to this ship. Since the Master Mode's flight model changes, it has been a fair bit more sluggish than it used to be, but it still manoeuvres well for a big hauler. And while the split deck design and long corridors to the bridge make it more than possible for a well-armed crew to hold control of the ship itself, the 2 large ramps into the cargo bay make defending your actual cargo from pirates a bit problematic to my mind. The M2 Hercules at 29.5 million credits is the military version of the series, exchanging some of the C2's cargo capacity for a heavier weapons loadout. The M2 brings a third remote turret to the table, again with 2 size 4s, and thanks to an additional gunner's seat in the bridge, 2 of these can be utilised at a time. The actual cargo hold of the M2 is dimensionally identical to the C2, so you don't lose any vehicle carrying capacity and can still comfortably fit 2 large ground vehicles on board. But the cargo grid is artificially reduced. I'd imagine this is just for game balance reasons. So rather than being able to stack boxes 4 units high on the grid, you can only do 3 high in this ship. This gives a total of 522 SCU of space on board, and while it's not a big difference in terms of raw tonnage, it does mean that you'll fit a lot less 32 SCU crates on board an M2, since you lose the ability to double stack those. Internally, the M2 is better equipped to accommodate the crew of the onboard vehicles, sacrificing the recreation area found on the C2 in favour of a ready room for troops with plentiful jump seats, as well as an armoury. In the future, when armour gets added into the game, we can expect the M2 to have better stats than the civilian model, making it better for hot dropping armour to the front lines. But right now this feature hasn't been added, so considering the more than 10 million gap in price, it is worth considering that you're arguably buying less ship overall for a lot more money. And finally for the Hercs, Crusader and indeed this installment, we have the A2 Hercules at 44.3 million aUEC. The A2 is the big brother of the A1 bomber, and brings a truly insane payload for when you really need to answer the question, is Jumptown safe? As mentioned in the intro to the Hercs, the A2 differs in terms of components in that it has a second size 3 power plant versus the one found on the other variants. This is largely required to power all the additional turrets it comes equipped with. As well as the 3 dual size 4s found on the M2, which are controlled from the co-pilot and gunner seats on the bridge, the A2 has a further 4 remote turrets on its underside. 2 of these are dual size 5s, while the other pair are a single size 5. The A2 replaces the C2's recreation room with a turret control room with seats for the gunners for these weapons. You'll also find the armoury similar to the M2 through here. These weapons all add to the ship's ground-to-air firepower, but its key capability in this regard can be found down in the cargo hold, where part of the space is given over to bomb bays for the 4 Moabs it carries. These size 10 Colossus bombs are capable of obliterating everything in a massive area, and should very much be viewed as an area denial weapon for when you want to clear an area out before you push in with your own ground forces. The A2 maintains a decent portion of the cargo hold found on the other Hercs, so you can still fit in at least 1 Nova, along with some smaller ground vehicles like the Storm or some Cyclones. And this all means that the A2 can fulfill a dual purpose of heavily bombarding a zone and clearing a landing area with its turrets, and then dropping in ground forces to take and hold an objective. Much like the A1, I would really love to see an update with the option to let the co-pilot handle the actual bomb release with better targeting screens, and I would caution again that at the price, the bombing niche is pretty expensive. But trust me, if you get to use one of these as designed and clear out a ground objective for your org to take control, it's worth every credit. So there we have it for Crusader and Tumbril for now. As I mentioned, I'll be working my way through the other manufacturers, and as and when we get new patches, I'll do short videos to just detail new ships as they get added to the in-game ship shops. So if you enjoy this sort of content and find it useful, please do hit subscribe to stay up to date. Now that my pup is back on his feet, I'll hopefully be able to get these rolling out pretty quickly. And please do let me know down in the comments which are your favourites from this list, or if there's another manufacturer that you want me to prioritise. I can't promise, but I'll see what I can do. But with all that said, I'd just like to say thank you very much for watching all the way to the end, and I look forward to seeing you next time.